President Donald Trump has left open the possibility of restarting the war with Iran. When asked by reporters whether talks with Iran had stalled and if he would consider resuming the war, he said the US might need to. Now, this as differences remain over Iran's nuclear program, particularly its enriched uranium stockpile, which Trump refers to as nuclear dust. The US president says he wants it. Listen to this.
Get it, we'll take it one way or the other, we'll get it. We'll either get it or we'll take it. They'll either give it to us or we'll take it.
Now, Trump has been briefed on fresh military options against Iran, even as negotiations continue behind closed doors. An Axios report suggests that Trump received a 45-minute briefing from CENTCOM Commander General Admiral Brad Cooper and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, on a fresh plan involving a special forces mission to secure Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. And this besides a short and powerful wave of strikes targeting Iranian infrastructure and an operation to take control of parts of Hormuz Strait. Should the US decide to send in military forces to secure the stockpile, it would be a complex, risky and lengthy operation fraught with radiation and chemical dangers. Given the risk of inserting as many as 1,000 specially trained people into a war zone to remove the stockpile. Now, another option would be negotiated settlement, which Iran said that it would allow the material to be surrendered and secured without using force. Earlier this week, Iran sent a new proposal to US via mediator Pakistan. It focused on reopening the strategic Strait of Hormuz while postponing a deal on Iran's nuclear program. However, Trump was reportedly unhappy with the proposal. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran has about 440 kgs of uranium that is enriched up to 60% purity, which is a short technical step away from weapons-grade levels to 90%. And that stockpile could allow Iran to build as many as 10 nuclear bombs, should it decide to weaponize its program. The IAEA inspector has not been able to verify the uranium since June 2025 after Israeli and American strikes on Iran. And the lack of inspections has made it difficult to know exactly where it is located. The IAEA believes that a stockpile of roughly 200 kilograms of highly enriched uranium is stored in tunnels at Iran's nuclear complex outside Isfahan. Additional quantities are believed to be at the Natanz nuclear site, and lesser amounts they may be stored at a facility in Fordo. And to unpack this further, from Melbourne, we're now being joined by Professor Tilman Roth. He's the co-president of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. Thank you so much, Professor Roth, for joining us on the broadcast. Now, President Donald Trump has repeatedly suggested that Iran could hand over what he calls nuclear dust, which is essentially the highly enriched uranium believed to be buried. Now, from a technical and practical standpoint, how realistic is it to expect Iran to recover and hand over such material, especially in an active conflict environment?
Well, certainly without Iran's cooperation, this would be a very difficult military operation. It's technically very difficult in any circumstances. Those facilities where we presume that the material is stored and nobody is quite sure where it is or even if it's all in one place, have been severely damaged by the bombing attacks in June last year and then this year. So those facilities are not organised, easy to enter. They may be very difficult, they may require substantial earthworks, they may be quite dangerous places, not amenable to a quick sort of move in, retrieve containers and be out again, that military forces of this sort of special operations nature might be expecting. This would be a technically demanding and difficult and complex operation, even if one knew where the material was. And I don't think that we can make any assumptions about that, as you suggested in your introduction. It may well be in multiple places. There's no precedent for removing such nuclear material either from such severely damaged facilities and particularly in a conflict zone. So I'm really not sure that that's very feasible. And it's also reported that by the Omani diplomats who were mediating, that just on the cusp of these current attacks, in fact, that Iran had been willing to surrender most, if not all, of the material, that substantial breakthrough on this sticking point of its highly enriched uranium was possible. So it seems particularly unfortunate that we're now talking about I think a really difficult and dangerous and probably not feasible military operation.
Right, we hear you, Professor Ruff. Now, despite back-channel efforts to de-escalate, Iran is holding firm on enrichment, while Washington insists that concessions must come first. Now, from your experience in nuclear risk reduction, does this kind of hardline positioning, does it increase the risk of escalation rather than preventing it, according to you?
Look, I think so, and I think it's important to be aware that under the previous arrangement, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal that was in place between 2015 and 2018, over that more than 3-year period, Iran accepted very severe limitations on its enrichment capacity. It agreed to enrich uranium only to less than 4%, so for use in nuclear reactors. And most of its enriched uranium was shipped to Russia. It also accepted very stringent safeguards to monitor that material with state-of-the-art environmental and surveillance and video surveillance and International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors 24 hours a day, 365 days a year in country. So Iran has already previously demonstrated that it has accepted quite severe limitations on its nuclear program. It would be really unfortunate if these attacks have made that kind of cooperation and negotiation much more difficult now, if the regime essentially is more hardline and no longer trusts its negotiating partner.
Absolutely, yeah, no, that is a very important point, Professor Ruff. And now with the blockade already impacting global supply chains, any escalation into a ground war would be a massive step up. And you've already warned about the consequences of war. But what would a ground offensive in Iran mean, not just militarily, but also in terms of the nuclear risk and the civilian impact?
The nuclear risks would probably be rather localized because the highly enriched uranium, up to 60%, as you mentioned, is in canisters. These are the size of roughly as tall as a person, and there would be some hundreds likely of those. They're not a particularly dangerous radioactive hazard. They are highly corrosive and flammable. The uranium hexafluoride form that the enriched uranium is in. So if these canisters are damaged, then it could result in fires and explosions and quite severe chemical hazards for people nearby. But that's not likely to result in radioactive contamination at a serious level that could sort of spread around the country beyond its borders and require evacuation of civilians and so
Noted.
forth. That kind of scenario would really happen as a result of a nuclear attack or damage to the Bashir nuclear plant, which is the only operating nuclear reactor at present. Those are the two things that could cause a severe radiological incident.
Right, we hear you, Professor Ruff, and I ask this because President Trump has suggested that the US could take control of the nuclear material by force, and this even as Iran remains defiant. But what I want to understand from you is that, is it actually possible to secure or even control this fissile material through military force?
Look, I don't think so. I think Iran clearly knows how to do this. It has reconstituted an enrichment program previously as a result of multiple kinds of both direct damage and also the previous damage that more than a decade ago was done through cyber attack, through the Stuxnet virus that damaged its centrifuges. So it has rebuilt this program on multiple occasions previously. We really don't know how extensive its underground facilities are, but they clearly exist. And it would be quite feasible, I think, for a determined Iran to reconstitute some kind of capacity at hidden underground locations, or even to enrich that material that they already have a little bit further and build nuclear weapons from it within a matter of weeks in secure underground locations. So that potential really can't be bombed away. That really has to be dealt with by negotiation, by verification processes, and by standards that where both sides play ball and can trust each other not to break agreements.
Absolutely, and there have been multiple claims and counterclaims, and the mistrust, which is very deeply embedded on both sides, as you've just mentioned. Now, and with that, the nuclear enrichment, it has been one of the main points of contention. According to you, Professor, how close or how far are we actually to seeing any realistic breakthrough? And would this particular action, as we were just discussing, do you think that's going to shift the balance of power in any way?
Look, I hope that President Trump's threats are really in the context of trying to put pressure on Iran while they're negotiating. I seriously hope that those negotiations are well underway, because we have previously reached negotiated settlements on Iran's enrichment program that were really highly satisfactory from an international point of view and really unprecedented in terms of the level of intrusiveness and effectiveness. We understand that negotiators made substantial progress on the nuclear disagreements prior to these attacks. So it would be a really tragic complication of this war if it in fact made negotiation now so difficult that no agreement is possible. But I think simply removing this material as some kind of quick fix is simply not feasible, as well as very difficult and dangerous.
Right. Of course, we'll have to wait and see how the situation goes from here, Professor Ruff. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your insights with us.
Thanks for having me.